22 years without a single call, without a single message left behind. Long enough for a man to believe he had buried a name for good. But when the wooden door swung open and he saw the face standing behind it, that name broke out of his mouth before he could stop it. Neither of them said another word. The two of them just stood there, in the middle of the red dirt yard, staring at each other like they were staring at a ghost that had just stepped out of their own past. To understand why one brief moment could leave a man, the most powerful person in any room he ever walked into, utterly speechless, we need to go back to that very morning, to his office, before any of this began. 45 years old, Darius Cole Whitmore stood before the 28-story high-glass wall of Whitmore Meridian Logistics headquarters, looking down at the city of Atlanta like looking down at an operational diagram. Vehicles were streams of data. Traffic lights were bottlenecks needing optimization. He did not see humans down there. He saw efficiency. $6–7 billion was not a number he hung on the wall. It was a breathing habit. He woke up at 5:15 every morning, needing no alarm clock, because his body had learned to obey discipline since he was a 16-year-old boy helping his father load goods onto the trucks. His father, Calvin Whitmore, used to have a small transport company with 3 old trucks and a ledger of debts thicker than the ledger of revenues. Calvin taught Darius exactly one thing, repeated over and over like a mantra. If you let emotions control decisions, you will lose everything. Darius listened to his father for 22 years, turning 3 trucks into a logistics empire spread across 14 states. He had never let emotion win any negotiation. This morning, there was exactly one thing lying outside of his control. Grant Holloway, the legal director, stepped into the private meeting room with a thick file folder. Grant was 54 years old, had worked for Darius for 11 years, and knew exactly when to speak frankly. "The Bellwether project is still stuck," Grant said, placing the file folder down on the glass table. "A single piece of land. The owner has refused 3 times. Darius did not turn back to look. "How many times have we raised the price?" 3. The last time was 40% higher than the market price. And they still refused. Still refused, Darius. Not a bargain, a flat refusal. Darius turned around. In the $340 million investment for the largest automated logistics center the company had ever built, there was exactly one feasible access route into the land area in Bellwether County. And that route cut across an 80-year-old wooden house belonging to a woman named Naomi Carter. That name glided past his ears like a strange wind. He did not recognize it. "Send another offer," Darius said, 15% higher compared to the last time. "We already tried that, Darius." "Then try it another way. I will go myself." Grant blinked. "You? You personally will drive 2 hours to a rural county to negotiate a piece of land worth less than $500,000? "I do not like to let a file lie still for more than 3 weeks, Darius replied, his voice as flat as the glass tabletop in front of him. "Bellwether has lain still for 5 weeks. He signed another document, approving the dispatch of personnel to meet the landowner directly on the weekend, then walked out of the meeting room without looking back behind his back, like every other time in his life. Before continuing the story, let me stop for exactly one sentence. If you find this opening engaging enough to continue with me, click follow the channel so as not to miss the next part. And if there was ever a time you chose to stay silent instead of explaining, just because you thought speaking out no one would believe anyway, leave a line of comment to let me know. I am truly curious. Now then, back to Bellwether County. Nearly a 2 hours drive south from there, at a small town in Bellwether County, Naomi Elise Carter was standing in the kitchen at 6:20 in the morning, holding an electricity bill envelope in her hand. The number on the piece of paper did not startle her. It only made her do a quick calculation in her head, as she still did every month. 43 years old, 2 part-time jobs, a 16-year-old daughter growing up faster than the amount of money she earned. Naomi worked as a coordinator for a community clinic 3 days a week. On weekends, she took on extra work, caring for the elderly in the area, old men and women who needed someone to help with bathing, taking medicine on time. Her total income was just enough to feed the mother and daughter and keep the roof from leaking further. She placed the bill envelope on the table, next to a pair of sports shoes that had their soles glued back on. Aaliyah's shoes. Naomi glued it with her own hands last night, under the desk lamp's light, while her daughter slept. "Mom, I do not need new shoes," Aaliyah had said, her voice stubborn exactly like her mother. "These shoes are still good." Naomi knew her daughter lied so she would feel less guilty. She also knew she had no other choice besides believing in that lie, at least for this week. She turned on the stove, poured oatmeal into the pot, stirring steadily while her eyes glanced over the small wooden shelf mounted on the kitchen wall. On the shelf, between a few old books and a dried flower vase, was a blue tin box, dented in one corner, its paint peeling off into small patches like shed snakeskin. She did not open it. She had never opened it in the morning. But her gaze always stopped there for 1 second, like an unintentional ritual, before returning to the boiling pot of porridge. Aaliyah stepped down the stairs, her hair half-braided, backpack slung askew on one shoulder. The 16-year-old girl had sharp eyes and a way of looking at adults as if weighing and measuring them. "The bus arrives later today," Aaliyah said, grabbing a spoon while sitting down. "I heard there are construction vehicles surveying something on the main road." Naomi paused her hand, stirring the porridge for exactly 1 beat. "Surveying what?" "I do not know. Staking poles, stringing orange lines. There are even company license plate vehicles." Naomi did not ask further. She had lived long enough to know that the stakes and orange lines never appeared by chance. She scooped the porridge into 2 bowls, placed 1 bowl in front of her daughter, then looked out the window, where the early sunlight spread a pale yellow layer onto the front yard, onto the house that her grandmother had once lived in, her mother had once lived in, and now was the only place Naomi could call hers. The morning passed like every other morning. Aaliyah got on the bus. Naomi washed the dishes, changed into her uniform, prepared to go to the clinic. She did not know that nearly 200 kilometers away, a man named Darius Cole Whitmore had just signed a document bearing her name, the name that would soon tear apart 22 years of silence. By Saturday noon, a shiny black SUV, so luxurious that it was out of place in the middle of the pothole-filled red dirt road, slowly turned into the entrance of Naomi's house. Red dust rolled up behind the wheels like a forewarning. The vehicle stopped in front of the gray wooden fence. The car door opened. Darius stepped out of the car with a stack of contracts tucked under his arm. He had worn a charcoal gray suit, the type of suit he still wore when needing to overpower a negotiation with exactly his appearance before opening his mouth. He did not intend to stay long. He intended to say 5 sentences, put forward a number, and leave before the sun stood overhead. The screen door of the house opened before he could finish crossing the yard. A woman stepped out, her hands still retaining a bit of flour on her apron, her hair tied up high, revealing the nape of her neck. She stopped at the steps, looking down at the strange man standing in the middle of her yard. "How can I help?" she said, not a question, but a boundary. Darius raised his head to look at her. There was a moment, exactly 1 moment, when the brain that inherently processed data faster than almost every machine he had ever built came to a complete halt. "Naomi," he said. The name popped out of his mouth before he could control it. She did not answer immediately. She looked at him from head to toe, as if comparing a 23-year-old face in her memory with the 45-year-old man standing in front of her. Then she tightened her hands on the apron. "Darius," she said, not a greeting. An acknowledged name, nothing more. 22 years. Not a single call, not a single reply letter, not a single accidental encounter during 22 years, and now they stood less than 6 meters apart, on the exact piece of land that his company was trying to buy back. The screen door creaked again. A 16-year-old girl stepped out to stand behind her mother's back, her eyes looking straight at Darius with the vigilance of a child who had learned to recognize danger from very early on. "Mom?" Aaliyah called softly. "Who is this person?" Naomi placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, gently but decisively, like a way of saying, "You just stand there. Mom can handle it." Darius looked at the girl, then looked back at Naomi. In his head, a final puzzle piece fell into its exact place. This woman was not a name on a legal file. She had had another life, a complete life, a life he had never been present in. He tried to regain his familiar demeanor. He raised the file folder up. "I represent Whitmore Meridian Logistics. My company is deploying a large infrastructure project in Bellwether County. This piece of land lies on the main access route." "I know," Naomi said. "I have received 3 letters. I came to make a more direct offer. much higher compared to what my company has sent. I also know that, Naomi replied, her voice still calm. The answer does not change. Darius had never stood before a refusal without being able to find a way to break it. He opened his mouth, intending to put forward a specific number, but Naomi had spoken first. "This is not an investment property, Darius," she said, calling his name for the first time since recognizing him. "This is the only house I can leave to my daughter. There is no amount of money that can exchange for that." She said that sentence without anger, without drama. She spoke as if reading a truth that had been considered for a long time, a truth she did not need to protect with emotion because it was already solid enough. Darius stood there, the file folder still in his hand, feeling a strange thing he had no name for it. Throughout 22 years of running an empire, no one had ever refused him with such a brief sentence without needing further explanation. "I will let the company contact again," he said, his voice having lost some part of its initial certainty. "Just contact," Naomi replied. "The answer will still be like that." He nodded, turned around, and walked towards the car. Before opening the door, he glanced back one time. Naomi had turned inside, one hand still placed on Aaliyah's shoulder, the screen door closing behind the mother and daughter with a familiar creak of old wood. Throughout the 2 hours' drive back to Atlanta, Darius did not turn on the radio. He did not call Grant to report the result. He drove in silence, both hands clenching the steering wheel, his eyes looking straight at the highway while his mind kept returning to a single image. Naomi's face when she recognized him, the way she tightened her hands on the apron, not out of fear, but out of an emotion he could not name. He arrived back at the office in late afternoon. Grant was waiting with another progress report in his hand, but Darius did not look at that piece of paper. "Naomi Carter," he said, his voice trying to keep a businesslike demeanor. "How long has she lived on that piece of land?" Grant was slightly surprised by the question deviating from the usual procedure, but still opened his laptop, typing a few keys. According to cadastral records, the Carter family has held the title to the land for many generations. Naomi Carter, in particular, moved back to live officially there for nearly 20 years. Nearly 20 years. Darius stood silently for a moment, looking out the office window, where the city lights were starting to turn on patch by patch. 20 years was a number that did not match the story he still told himself throughout the past 22 years. The story about a woman who had chosen money instead of love, then disappeared from his life without a word of explanation. If she had lived there since before he had even finished building his first company, then the story he still believed for 22 years might not be as complete as he thought. "Do you need me to prepare anything else for the next negotiation round?" Grant asked. Darius did not answer immediately. He only looked out the window, where darkness was gradually covering the city, and felt an old door, thought to have been tightly locked for a long time, had just cracked open a very small gap. There are memories people do not need to try to remember. They just surface on their own, at the right time, at the right place, like an old pain that has never completely healed. That night, in the apartment on the 42nd floor, Darius sat alone with a glass of whiskey not yet touching his lips, and let 22 years ago rush into the room. He was 23 years old. Naomi was 21. They met at a cheap diner near the community college, where Naomi worked as a waitress 3 evenings a week to pay her tuition. Darius at that time had nothing besides an old truck inherited from his father, a notebook full of route diagrams, and an almost crazy belief that he would turn Calvin Whitmore's 3 trucks into something bigger. Naomi was the first person to believe him without needing proof. They dated over $5 meals split in half. The evenings Darius sat at Naomi's dining table, spreading transport route maps all over the tabletop, drawing and redrawing the transit points with a pencil while Naomi poured coffee and listened. Not because she understood all those numbers, but because she understood him. "You will do it," she once said, sitting next to him at midnight, her head resting on his shoulder. "I do not know any formula for that. I just know that you will do it." Darius believed that that was the first and only true love in his life. Then Calvin's company stood on the brink of bankruptcy. A large contract was canceled at the last minute. A bank loan became due, and suddenly the future that Darius was trying to build hung suspended on a thin thread. He remembered the evening he discovered Naomi had disappeared. Not a single message, not a single answered call. He drove to her house, knocked on the door, and only received the silence of an empty house. 3 weeks later, he accidentally heard from a mutual friend that Naomi had received a large sum of money from his father. He did not ask how much. He did not ask why. He only heard exactly one sentence, and that sentence was enough to slam shut all remaining doors in his heart. He sought to meet her exactly one time, at this exact house, 22 years ago. He did not remember exactly what he had said, only remembering his voice had been loud, his hands had trembled, and he had thrown the matter into her face like throwing a verdict. "How much?" he asked her back then. "How much did my father pay you to disappear from my life?" Naomi stood there, her eyes red, her lips pressed tightly together, and did not say a single word to defend herself. That silence, back then, Darius considered as a confession. He turned his back and walked away. He did not come back to look for her a second time. The pride of a 23-year-old young man who had just been heavily wounded was strong enough for him to convince himself that he had been right, that she had chosen money, that her love had never been big enough to overcome a number. From that night, Darius learned a lesson he carried with him throughout the rest of his life. Do not let emotions control decisions. He turned that pain into fuel. He worked 18 hours a day. He did not date anyone seriously for many years. He built his father's company into a corporation worth billions of dollars, and every time he signed a large contract, he would hear the old self-reminder echoing, "Money always wins, emotions always lose." The glass of whiskey on the table still had not been drained a single drop. Darius placed it down, looked out the window, trying to chase away the image of Naomi's 21-year-old face, then forced himself to return to the work in front of his eyes. The next morning, Grant brought to his table another update about Bellwether County. "We have put forward the final offer," Grant said, 60% higher than the market price. Miss Carter still refused. Darius sat silently for a long time, his fingers tapping lightly on the glass tabletop. There was a part in him, a very small part, wanting to ask more about Naomi, about her life throughout the past 22 years, about the true reason behind that sum of money from the old days. But the larger part in him, the part that had been trained by discipline and efficiency throughout 22 years, had spoken first. "Let the project department continue the necessary procedures," he said. "What do you mean, specifically?" Grant asked. "I mean to let Claire handle it strictly according to the standard procedure. Reevaluate the land classification. Inspect the area's infrastructure. Everything according to the law, according to the procedure." Grant nodded, not asking further, because that was exactly how the company still operated with every other stubborn piece of land. Darius told himself that this was not an action aimed at Naomi. This was just work. This was how a $340 million corporation operated when encountering an obstacle. He did not order to harm anyone. He only allowed the company machine to do exactly its part of the job. But that machine, once it had been started, did not know how to stop at the right time. That afternoon, at the project development department, Claire Donovan opened a new zoning map of the Bellwether area, marked the access route again, proposing a series of mandatory infrastructure inspections around the Carter house's piece of land. She had no hatred towards Naomi. She was only doing exactly the work that the company had invested hundreds of millions of dollars to protect. No one in that building thought they were doing a wrong thing. Each person was only doing exactly the part of the job assigned to them, and exactly that, more than any cruel order, was the thing that caused the machine to start tightening around a small house in Bellwether County, where a woman and her daughter were completely unaware of what was about to strike. No one came to knock on Naomi's door to threaten. No one called loudly. The pressure came in a much softer way, and because of that was also much harder to fight back. First was the road. A county survey team, coordinating with Whitmore Meridian, started driving stakes along the dirt road leading into Naomi's housing area, preparing for the expansion of the construction access route. They did not block the road completely, only narrowing it down to one lane, enough so that every morning Naomi had to wait for the construction trucks to pass before she could drive out to the main road. Then came the water. A mandatory infrastructure inspection, exactly according to the new regulation passed by the county, caused the repair of the broken water pipe at the corner of Naomi's backyard to be continuously delayed. She called the plumber 3 times in 2 weeks. All 3 times, he said the exact same sentence. This area is under zoning. I am not allowed to dig the pipes until there is a new permit. No one told her that this was the consequence of her refusing to sell the land. No one needed to say it at all. Naomi was clear-headed enough to see the connection. Then came the school bus. The old pickup point, a 5 minutes walk from Naomi's house, was moved away because the road was under construction. The new pickup point was a 25 minutes walk from her house, along a road without sidewalks, only having dirt shoulders and weeds growing up to knee-high. Every morning, Naomi woke up 40 minutes earlier to take Aaliyah to the new pickup point before driving herself to the clinic. She did not complain. She only readjusted the alarm clock, readjusted the schedule, as she still always did with every other difficulty in life. But Aaliyah, at the age of 16, was old enough to see the thing her mother did not say out loud. "Mom," the little girl asked one evening when the mother and daughter sat eating a late dinner after a long day, "if you sell the land, we will have enough money to not have to worry about these things anymore, right?" Naomi placed the chopsticks down, looking at her daughter for a very long time. "Right. Then why don't you sell? Because this house is not just a number, Aaliyah. It is the place where your great-grandmother grew up, your grandmother grew up, mother grew up. If mother sells it away, mother also sells that part of you." Aaliyah did not argue back. The little girl bowed her head, silently finishing the dinner. But in her eyes, something had begun to be understood, a lesson about self-respect that no textbook could teach. In Atlanta, nearly a 2-hour drive away from there, Darius sat in one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. In front of him was a plate of pan-seared salmon so perfect that it looked like a work of art. He did not touch his chopsticks to it. On the tablet placed next to the dinner plate was a latest progress report from Claire Donovan. The last line clearly stated, "The owner of the Bellwether land plot still has no signs of leaving." Darius read that sentence over and over 5 times. He thought of Naomi's face when she said the sentence, "This is the only place I can leave to my daughter." He thought of the little girl standing behind her mother's back, the vigilant eyes of a child who had learned to recognize danger too early. He folded the tablet up, called the waiter to take the portion of food away, then left the restaurant without saying a single word of explanation to the colleagues sitting at the same table. The next morning, he drove himself to Bellwether County again, unannounced, not bringing any contracts along. Naomi was out in the yard when he arrived, her hand holding a small shovel, trying to fill up a stagnant puddle of water near the back door, the consequence of the broken pipe not yet repaired. She looked up when hearing the vehicle's sound, not showing surprise nor showing annoyance. She only continued her work. "Do you know why the road is narrowed down?" Darius asked, standing a few steps away from her. "I can guess," Naomi replied, not raising her head up. "Do you know why the water pipe has not been repaired?" "I can also guess that." "Then why don't you call me? Complain? Sue my company?" Naomi stood up straight, looking straight into his eyes, and in those eyes there was not a bit of fear, only a calmness that made Darius feel more uncomfortable than any anger he had ever faced in the meeting room. "Because I do not need your company to pity me," she said. "I only need your company to leave me alone." Darius had no answer for that. He stood silently, looking around the patch of yard, looking at the gray wooden fence, looking at the roof needing repair, and his eyes unintentionally stopped at the ajar door of a room at the back of the house, where previously used to be Naomi's grandmother's room. Through the door crack, on a small table placed close to the window, he saw a blue tin box, dented in one corner, its paint peeling off. There was something in that image that made his chest tighten, even though he could not name that feeling. It did not look like a normal box stored by chance on a dusty table. It looked like an object that had been carefully preserved by someone through very many years, an object waiting to be opened and had waited for too long already. "You should leave," Naomi said, cutting across his stream of thoughts. "I still have work to do." Darius nodded, turned around and walked towards the car, but throughout the drive back to Atlanta, the image of the blue tin box kept returning in his head, like a question having no answer yet, like something he knew he had once seen, even though he could not remember where, when. 3 days later, Darius returned to Bellwether County, this time bringing along an official document, a final notice before the company initiated stronger legal procedures. He told himself this was only a necessary step in the process, a responsibility he could not evade with the role of CO. But in his heart, there was another reason, a reason he had not yet dared to name. He wanted to look at that blue tin box again. Naomi was not at home when he arrived. There was only Alia, sitting studying at the kitchen table, her vigilant eyes no different from the previous time. "My mother went to work at the clinic," Alia said, not inviting him in, nor chasing him away. "You can wait out on the porch." Darius nodded, stepped out to the porch, sat down on the old wooden chair. But only a few minutes later, when Alia returned to the study room upstairs, he stood up, walked around to the back of the house, arriving before the ajar wooden door of the room he had seen the previous time. The small room, neat, the afternoon sunlight piercing through the window frame, covering a pale yellow streak onto the wooden floor. On the table placed close to the wall, the blue tin box lay there, as if waiting. Darius stepped closer, his hand trembling slightly when touching the box lid. He opened it. Inside were dozens of old envelopes, the paper already turning yellow with time. He picked up the topmost envelope, and his heart seemed to stop beating for a beat when seeing the familiar handwriting, exactly his own handwriting, 22 years ago, sent to Naomi Elise Carter from the faraway business trips finding customers for his young company. He flipped through this envelope to another envelope. All were letters he had written, had sent, during the years and months they were still in love. She had kept every single one, every single stamp, every single fold. Beneath his pile of letters was another stack of paper, written in Naomi's handwriting, but having no envelope, having no stamp. The letters she wrote but had never sent away. Darius opened one letter, read the first few lines, and felt his throat choke up. "I do not know where to start so you would understand," one line wrote. "I only hope someday, when you have become less angry, you will ask me why." He never asked. He placed the letter down, his hands trembling more, continued to rummage deep into the box. At the bottom of the box was a stack of small, old receipts, arranged in chronological order. He picked them up to read. The first receipt recorded the sum of $50,000, signed by Naomi Elise Carter, dated exactly matching the time she disappeared from his life. The remaining receipts? Dozens of sheets, each sheet a small amount. $100, $200, sometimes only $50, stretching throughout nearly 8 years. He realized those were the repayment amounts, bit by bit, until the total sum exactly matched the initial $50,000. Finally, he found a hospital fee bill, dated exactly the same as the day Naomi received the first sum of money. The patient's name was clearly printed. Andre Bennett, 10 years old. Diagnosis: needing urgent heart surgery. Darius slumped down onto the chair, his hand grasping the bill, his breath hurried. Andre Bennett. He remembered that name, a child that he had never met, Naomi's younger brother. He continued to rummage, and at the very bottom of the box, underneath everything else, was an old envelope, handwritten by a trembling, weak handwriting, the handwriting of an old person struggling against the remaining time of his life. He recognized that handwriting. His father's handwriting, Calvin Whitmore. He opened the letter, reading line by line in absolute silence. "Naomi, if you read this letter, it means I no longer had enough courage to say this while alive. I was wrong. I gave you $50,000, not because I thought your love could be bought, but because I was afraid that you would make Darius give up everything I had tried to build for him. I did not know your younger brother was needing a surgery. I only knew you had received the money, and I used that to force you to leave my son, not giving you the chance to explain to him. I apologize to you, Naomi, and if possible, I apologize to my son as well for having let him live 20 years with a lie I created." Darius sat motionless for a very long time, the letter trembling in his hand. Outside the window, the afternoon sunlight had turned into a dark orange color. He understood everything in a single moment, more painful than any business failure he had ever experienced. Naomi had not chosen money instead of love at all. She had chosen her younger brother's life, when pushed by his own father into a situation with no kind choice at all. She had spent nearly 8 years after that to repay every single penny, not because she was forced to, but because to her, that was not a gift. That was a debt of honor she voluntarily bore. But the most painful thing did not lie in the sum of money, did not lie in his father's lie. The most painful thing was that throughout 22 years, Darius had never once asked her why. He had seen the surface of the matter, a sum of money, a disappearance, and he had let his wounded pride write the rest of the story, without needing any proof, without needing any answer from the very person he had once loved most deeply. The door behind him moved slightly. Darius turned around, and Naomi was standing at the doorway, looking at him, looking at the tin box thrown open on the table, looking at Calvin's letter still grasped in his hand. Naomi stood at the doorway for a very long time before stepping in. She did not scream, did not angrily rush forward to snatch the box. She just stood there, looking at Darius, looking at Calvin's letter in his hand, and in her eyes, Darius recognized something closer to relief than anger, as if she had waited for this moment for a very long time without daring to admit to herself. "I am sorry," Darius said, his voice completely hoarse. "I should not have entered this room. I do not have the right." "No," Naomi replied, stepping close to the table. "Perhaps this is exactly what should have happened 22 years ago." She sat down on the chair opposite him, her hand placed lightly on the open tin box lid, as if touching a part of her own body. "Andre lived," she said, her voice calm as if recounting a truth that had been accepted for a long time. "The surgery was successful. He grew up, studied emergency medicine, is now an emergency medical technician. He did not know the whole story behind that sum of money until he was nearly 30 years old." "And the sum of money?" Darius asked, even though he already knew the answer from the receipts in the box. "I paid back every single penny. It took nearly 8 years. Not because your father forced me, he never demanded it. I did it myself because I did not want to owe anyone a favor in a way that made me feel I had sold something." Darius looked at her, feeling all the explanations, all the reasons he had used to convince himself throughout 22 years were collapsing piece by piece. "My father," he said. "Later did he ever—" "He regretted it," Naomi interrupted, gently. "Many years later, he sought me out once, apologized. I am not sure I forgave him back then. But I listened. The letter you are holding is what he wrote before he passed away, sent to me through the family's lawyer." Darius placed the letter down on the table, as gently as if placing a too fragile object. "And why did you not find me? After everything was fine with Andre, why did you not come back? Explain to me." This was the question he had carried with him throughout the whole day, since the moment he opened his father's letter, and now it popped out uncontrollably. Naomi was silent for a moment, her eyes looking down at the box. "I also asked myself that question very many times, Darius. The truth is, I was also hurt. You came to meet me once, threw everything in my face, then walked away before I could say a single sentence. I stood there, crying, and told myself if you truly loved me, you would come back to ask. You would give me a chance. But you did not come back. And my pride, at the age of 21, was strong enough for me to tell myself I did not need to run after to explain to a person who did not want to listen." She looked up, looking straight into his eyes, and the next sentence she spoke out, slowly, clearly, like a final verdict needing no appeal. "You knew I received the money. You never wanted to know what price I had to pay to receive it." Darius had nothing to reply back. That sentence was so true that it left no room for him to justify. He had spent his whole life to build an empire based on seeing through all numbers, all risks, all opportunities. But with the woman who once loved him most deeply, he had never been willing to spend even just a single question. "Marcus," he said, remembering the name he had vaguely heard from Grant. "Your husband. He passed away 6 years ago," Naomi said, her voice softening a bit, carrying both pain and appreciation. "Heart complications. He was an electrical technician, a kind, gentle man. We had 12 years together. Aliyah is our daughter." Darius nodded slowly. He understood, perhaps for the first time truly understood, that throughout the years he was absent, Naomi had not stood still waiting for him to come back. She had lived a complete life, had loved, had been loved, had built a family, and had endured her own loss. She was not a supporting character in his story. She was the main character in her own story. He looked out the door, where Aliyah was standing huddled behind the doorframe, clearly having heard a part of the conversation. The little girl looked at him no longer with hostile eyes, but with a cautious scrutiny, as if trying to understand who this man truly was. Darius realized, in that moment, that he did not have the right to step into their lives just because he just discovered he had been wrong throughout 22 years. The truth just exposed did not automatically turn into a ticket for him to come back. "I will fix this," he said, standing up. "I do not mean to say I can fix everything, but the project, the pressures my company has caused for your family, I will stop." Naomi did not say anything, only looking at him leaving the room. On the drive back to Atlanta, Darius called Grant immediately, not waiting until arriving back at the office. "Stop all procedures related to the Bellwether land plot," he said, his voice more decisive than any order he had ever given in his life. Immediately. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Darius," Grant said, his voice cautious, "I need to speak clearly with you. This matter is not as simple as a phone call. We have signed contracts with the road construction contractors. The county has approved the infrastructure procedures. Machinery has been scheduled to be mobilized." "I do not care where it has gone to," Darius said. "Stop it. I will try," Grant replied, "but some things have already exceeded your direct control." Darius hung up the phone, gripped the steering wheel tightly, looking at the highway stretching out in front of him in the falling darkness. For the first time in his life, he realized that the machine he had built, the machine that had once obeyed all his orders without a bit of hesitation, was now running faster than his ability to stop it. 2 days later, Darius returned to Bellwether County with a completely different file folder compared to the previous times. Not a land purchase contract. That was a transfer proposal, transferring the entire ownership of the land expanded by an additional 50 acres around it to Naomi's family, accompanied by a trust fund worth enough to repair the house, build a private water pipe, and ensure Alia's educational future was no longer a burden. He placed the file folder on the kitchen table, where Naomi was sitting peeling apples for a pot of jam. "I know money cannot fix what is past," he said, "but I want to do something. I cannot let everything stop at an empty apology." Naomi looked at the file folder, not touching it. She placed the knife down, wiped her hands on the apron, then looked straight at him. "Darius," she said, her voice slow but certain, "do you know the feeling of owing someone once in a lifetime is like what? I took 8 years to pay back a debt I did not even truly owe, only because I did not want to feel myself being bought. Now you want me to accept an even larger sum under the name of an apology?" "This is not bribery," Darius said. This is another way for me to owe you again," Naomi interrupted, not loudly, but decisively. "I refuse, not because I hate you, Darius. I refuse because I have spent my whole life so as not to have to live under the shadow of a debt I did not voluntarily create." Darius stood silently, picked the file folder up, looking at it like looking at an object suddenly becoming meaningless. Throughout his career, he had learned that every problem always had a price to solve. This was the first time he faced a person refusing that logic to the root. He nodded, slowly, and put the file folder back into his briefcase. "Then I will not force you to accept," he said. "But there are things I must fix, not because of you, but because my company directly caused them. The road being narrowed, the water pipe being delayed, the bus pickup point being moved away. That is not your fault. That is the consequence I created." Naomi was silent for a moment, then nodded lightly, as if accepting a more reasonable boundary. In the days after that, Darius worked without resting, not to impress, but because he felt this was the only thing he could do without Naomi having to accept anything from him. He directed the restoration of the road back to its original state. He sent a separate construction team, paid by personal budget, to repair the water pipe within 1 day. He worked with the county, so the bus pickup point was moved back to the old location. He paid all legal costs arising from the procedures that his company had initiated, and most importantly, he signed a document protecting the land ownership of the Carter family, not accompanied by any exchange conditions. He did not demand Naomi to thank him. He did not demand her to meet him to confirm. He only acted, silently, like a way of making amends, not needing an audience, not needing anyone to witness, not needing anyone to acknowledge. This was the first time in his life he did a thing without calculating to see what it would bring back for him. But on an evening, when he was reviewing the entire progress with Grant over the phone, a detail made him stop his pen midway. "And the administrative enforcement order," Grant said, his voice somewhat reserved. "The one that the legal department had submitted to the county since 3 weeks ago, based on the non-compliant infrastructure report of the Carter land plot." "I thought we had stopped all procedures," Darius said, his fingers tightly gripping the phone. "You ordered to stop the new steps, but that enforcement order had been approved and signed by a county judge 2 days before you called me. It has entered the official execution process." "Then cancel it." "Not that simple, Darius. That is a judicial decision, not an internal email. The withdrawal of an order already signed by a judge needs at least 30 days of procedures, unless there is an emergency appeal. The construction contractor and the county police have received the execution schedule for Friday morning." Darius looked at the watch. "Today is Wednesday." "The machinery team," he said, his voice starting to trail off. "They will still come?" "According exactly to schedule, yes. Unless there is someone stopping it with an authority even higher than you in this company." Darius sat silently, looking out the apartment window, where the city lights of Atlanta still sparkled like every other night, indifferent to everything happening a 2 hours drive away. For the first time in 22 years of running the company, he realized that the machine he had built, the machine that had once executed all his orders without a single delay, was now running on its own inertia, no longer obeying the person who had created it. He thought of Naomi, of Alia, of the 80-years-old wooden house standing silently in the darkness of Bellwether County, completely unaware that on Friday morning, a convoy of construction vehicles would advance into that red dirt road, carrying along an order that even the person who signed the contract initiating it no longer had the ability to stop. Darius stood up, walked to the closet, taking out a more casual set of clothes than usual. Not a tailored suit, not a silk tie. He knew he would not sleep tonight. He also knew, even though not having clearly envisioned what he would do, that on Friday morning he had to be present there before the convoy could advance into the red dirt road. The sky was not yet completely bright when Darius drove to Bellwether County. The eastern sky had only just turned a pale gray, streaks of dew still clinging to the grass fields on both sides of the highway. He had called Grant at 4 in the morning, requesting the preparation of all necessary documents so he could personally stand out to take responsibility for stopping the construction, regardless of what the contract consequences were. "Do you understand what this means?" Grant asked over the phone, his voice still sleepy but full of worry. "If you arbitrarily interfere with an enforcement order already approved by the court, the company could face breach of contract with the contractor, schedule penalties, even personal legal responsibility." "I understand," Darius said. "Prepare the documents for me to sign acknowledging full financial responsibility for stopping the construction. Me personally, not the company." Grant was silent for a long time. "All right, I will be there within 1 hour." Darius arrived first. The red dirt road leading into Naomi's house was still deserted when he stopped the car at the exact intersection between the main road and the entrance to the land plot. He stepped out, standing there alone in the pale light of the early morning, looking towards the 80-years-old wooden house still submerged in the darkness. Less than 20 minutes later, he heard the sound of engines. A convoy of vehicles appeared from afar, 2 heavy-duty trucks carrying leveling machinery, a county employee's vehicle, and a police car leading the way. Red dust rolled up behind the wheels, exactly like how his own SUV had once rolled up dust the first time he came here. The convoy slowed down upon seeing the black SUV parked across the middle of the entrance. A police officer stepped down, advancing towards Darius, his hand resting lightly on his belt out of professional reflex. "Sir, you need to move the vehicle. We have an official execution order to begin the enforcement work in this area." "I am Darius Whitmore," he said, his voice calm but certain. "I am the head of the company that requested this enforcement order, and I am officially requesting to stop all construction here, bearing all personal responsibility for this decision." The officer frowned. "Do you have official documents? The court's order is still in effect until there is a revocation decision." Just at that moment, another vehicle pulled up. Grant stepped down with a thick file folder, his face tense but his eyes resolute. He exchanged quickly with the officer, putting forward the document pledging Darius's personal responsibility, along with an emergency appeal petition that the legal team had drafted throughout the night. "We need time to verify with the court," the officer said, holding the file folder, turning back to the vehicle to contact. While waiting, no one in the convoy dared to advance another meter towards the house, because Darius's SUV was still parked blocking across the entrance, and the very man standing next to it, his arms crossed in front of his chest, had no intention of budging. Darius stood there for nearly an hour, not saying another word, not calling another phone call, just standing, like a living wall between the machine he had once created and the small house sinking in silence behind his back. The door of Naomi's house opened. She stepped out to the porch, standing there, looking towards the road, where the construction convoy was still waiting and Darius was still standing blocking in the middle. Aaliyah stood next to her mother, the mother and daughter not saying anything, only observing. Naomi did not run out. She did not say any words of thanks, did not wave her hand, did not have any gesture showing she considered this a moment needing to be acknowledged. She just stood there, quietly, as if witnessing a thing that should have happened a long time ago, no more, no less. Near 9 o'clock in the morning, the officer returned, announcing that the court had temporarily suspended the enforcement order while reviewing the emergency appeal petition. The convoy began to turn around, slowly retreating from the red dirt road. The project, worth $340 million, the most important strategic project in the financial year of Whitmore Meridian Logistics, was officially suspended indefinitely. That afternoon, Darius received an urgent call from the chairman of the board of directors, requesting an extraordinary meeting right within the week. He knew he would have to explain for a decision not lying in any business plan, a decision stemming from a completely different place than the profit logic he had still obeyed throughout 22 years. But when he drove away from Bellwether County that afternoon, looking through the rearview mirror, seeing the small wooden house still standing intact in the afternoon sunlight, he felt a certain something he had never felt after any successful deal in his career. He did not expect Naomi would run out to thank him. He did not expect she would look at him differently just because of an action, no matter how big that action was. He understood, perhaps for the first time truly understood, that doing the right thing does not create any debt of gratitude for the person one had once hurt. It is not a transaction. It does not demand a response. It is simply the right thing needing to be done, regardless of who sees it, regardless of who acknowledges it, regardless of whether it brings anything back for him or not. And for the first time throughout 22 years, Darius Cole Whitmore felt more relieved. Not because he had won a negotiation, but because he had chosen to stop a wrong thing, even if the price having to be paid could be everything he had built. The board of directors meeting took place on a Tuesday morning, in the granite-paved meeting room that Darius had once stepped into with the absolute confidence of a person who had never lost a negotiation. This time, he stepped in with a completely different mindset. 12 board members sat around the table, financial files laid out ready in front of each person. The damage figure was projected onto the large screen at the end of the room. The Bellwether project suspended indefinitely, incurred costs due to contract breach with the contractor, the initial investment considered completely lost, and a replacement location in the north of the state would need at least 3 more years to complete the geological survey. "We need an explanation, Darius," the board chairman said, his voice unable to hide the frustration. "You arbitrarily interfered with a legal decision that this very company has pursued for many months. The shareholders are asking questions." Darius stood up, not bringing along the pre-prepared presentation, having no charts, having no data for defense. "I will not explain that decision in financial language," he said, "because that was not a financial decision. That was a moral decision. This company has used its power to tighten around a family doing nothing wrong besides refusing to sell their property. I was the person who allowed that to happen, and I am the person who must stop it." The room was silent for a long time. An elderly member spoke up, his voice less harsh. "Then what do you intend to do to ensure this matter does not repeat, at the same time still keeping the shareholders' trust?" This was exactly the question Darius had prepared for throughout the whole previous week, not to defend the past, but to shape the future. He presented a completely new land acquisition policy for Whitmore Meridian Logistics. From now on, all large infrastructure projects must mandatorily undergo an independent community impact assessment before any land negotiation begins. Every landowner has the right to access independent legal counsel paid for by the company, unrelated to the legal team of Whitmore Meridian. And most importantly, every landowner has the right to refuse to sell without having to suffer any administrative or infrastructure pressure lying outside the scope of a normal contract negotiation. The board debated fiercely for over 2 hours. Finally, the policy was passed with a narrow majority vote, accompanied by a stricter oversight clause regarding the CO's personal authority in future decisions. Darius accepted all those clauses without a single word of objection. He understood this was the reasonable price for a lesson that he should have learned from a very long time ago. But he did not mention this new policy at all when talking with Naomi. He did not bring it out like a proof to prove he had changed. He only let it exist as a part of work, completely separated from the relationship gradually reforming between the two people. Many weeks passed, then many months. Darius no longer appeared in Bellwether County with file folders or financial offers anymore. He only came when invited, usually on weekends, bringing along nothing besides himself. There was a time he came to help repair the leaking porch roof, sleeves rolled up, sweat wetting the back of his shirt like a normal worker. There was a time he just sat on the steps, listening to Alia tell about her dream of studying civil engineering and answering the little girl's questions about how a company operates without speaking in the condescending tone of a billionaire granting a favor to a child. The little girl gradually became less vigilant, although never completely letting her guard down. One evening, when Alia had gone up to her room, Naomi and Darius sat on the house porch, the teacups gradually cooling between the two people. "Tell me about Marcus," Darius said, his voice gentle, having not a bit of jealousy or defensiveness. Naomi looked at him, slightly surprised before that request, then smiled lightly. She told about Marcus, the man she met 8 years after the day parting with Darius, an electrical technician working diligently, speaking little but always present exactly when she needed him most. She told about the small wedding organized right at this house's yard, about the difficult but warm years and months, about the day Alia was born, and about the morning 6 years ago when Marcus's heart stopped beating because of a sudden heart attack no one could react to in time. Darius listened to every single word, not interrupting, not trying to compare himself with the deceased man, not seeking a way to prove he was more worthy. He only listened, like a friend, like a person trying to completely understand the life of the person he had once loved, instead of only understanding the part related to himself. "He must have been a good person," Darius said when Naomi finished telling. "He was the best person I have ever known," Naomi replied, her eyes slightly wet but her voice still steady. Darius nodded, not saying anything more, only letting that silence exist as a respect reserved for a life he was not present in, a complete life that he had only just been allowed to step into, to listen, not to replace or take over anything in it. That was the moment, even though very small, even though having no declaration accompanying it, Naomi started to see a different man from the billionaire who had once stepped down from the shiny black SUV last year. Not because Darius had tried to prove anything, but because he had learned how to sit still, listen, and not demand anything in return. 1 year passed since the morning the black SUV blocked across the red dirt road. The 80-years-old wooden house in Bellwether County still stood there, but was no longer exactly the same as before. The tile roof had been replaced anew with the insurance money that Naomi persistently claimed the rights for throughout many months, plus the savings she accumulated from 2 part-time jobs and a portion of support from the community housing recovery program she registered to participate in according exactly to the equal conditions for every household in the county, not a personal gift from Darius. She had refused to let him pay for the house repair directly, even though he had offered no less than 3 times. Every time, her answer was still like that, gentle but unwavering. "I want this house to stand firm by my own hands, Darius, not by your pity." He gradually learned how to respect that boundary, not because he stopped wanting to help, but because he understood that mature love is not rescuing a poor woman. The thing he needed to rescue first was not Naomi's circumstance, but his own ability in seeing other people as equals, not as puzzle pieces needing to be rearranged according to his will. Alia, now already 17 years old, had just received an admission notice letter into a prestigious civil engineering program, partly thanks to the weekends she sat chatting with Darius, asking him about how large structures were designed, about how materials bore loads, about how a road was planned to serve people instead of only serving profits. She no longer looked at Darius with the vigilant eyes of the first day anymore, but she also did not call him anything else besides his first name, a small distance that both implicitly understood and respected. Darius and Naomi had spent the whole year to rebuild trust, bit by bit, like how people rebuild a cracked wall, not by hastily plastering a new layer of mortar on top, but by removing each old brick, rechecking the foundation, then restacking from the beginning. There were evenings they just sat silently next to each other on the house porch, not needing to say anything. There were evenings they talked about the lost years and months, about the choices both wished they could have made differently. No one blamed all the faults on the other person. No one considered themselves the only victim of the story. One Saturday afternoon, when the two people sat on the porch, Naomi finally also spoke out the thing she had considered for a very long time. "I forgive you," she said, her voice calm, not dramatic, exactly like the way she still spoke all important truths in her life. "But forgiving does not mean those 22 years have never happened, Darius. It still happened. It still leaves traces in how I look at people, and how I teach my daughter about trust. I forgive, but I do not forget." Darius looked at her, nodding slowly. "I do not want you to forget," he said. "I do not want to erase those 22 years, because if erasing it, I also erase the lesson that has made me become the person sitting here today. I only want to never repeat the person who had created those years and months." Naomi smiled, a light but genuine smile, and both did not say anything more about whether they were getting back together or not, because both understood this was not a reconnection. This was a new something, built by two people who were completely different compared to the two people who had once loved each other 22 years ago. The Sunday morning the next day, Naomi stepped out to the house porch with 2 cups of hot coffee in her hands. Darius was squatting on the steps, along with Andre, Naomi's younger brother now already in his 30s, repairing a loose plank that both had made an appointment with each other to do since the previous week. Andre held the hammer, Darius held the plank, both exchanging a few light jokes about how a logistics engineer could be so clumsy when holding nails. On the small wooden table placed next to the door, the blue tin box lay there, its lid already opened since last night, when Naomi sat alone rearranging the keepsakes inside. She placed the coffee cup down, sat down by the table, opening the box again. Inside, the old letters, the receipts, Calvin's end-of-life letter, all still lay intact there, the evidences of a misunderstanding lasting 22 years. She took out the old photograph, the photograph taking her and Darius when both were still young, standing in front of this exact house, smiling radiantly without knowing beforehand what was about to happen. She looked at the photograph for a very long time, then gently placed it to one side, not to throw away, but to save space. From inside her shirt pocket, she took out a new photograph, taken 2 weeks ago, on a normal afternoon having nothing special. In the photograph were Darius, Naomi, and Alia, standing in front of the house that had its roof repaired, the afternoon sunlight covering yellow onto all 3 people, no one forcing a smile, all were real smiles. Naomi placed the new photograph into the box, right next to the old photograph, not replacing it, only placing it next to it, like a proof for the fact that time does not erase the past, it only adds into it new chapters. She closed the box lid back, looking out to the yard, where Darius and Andre had just finished hammering the last nail, their laughter echoing in the quiet morning. The blue tin box, dented in one corner, was no longer a place storing the evidences of a painful misunderstanding lasting 22 years anymore. It had become another place, a place containing the proof that humans can change, can learn how to look at each other with fairer eyes, but only after they stop demanding other people to forgive them and start learning how to live worthy of that forgiveness, every day, without needing any declaration. The box lid closed. The Sunday morning sunlight still remained intact on the house porch, and the story of Darius, of Naomi, of a tin box had gone exactly a full circle, from the place of hiding a truth to the place of being open to heal it. Thank you for having stayed with me up to here. If you have followed fully all 10 parts, have, together with Darius, stepped through every door, every letter, every time he had to relearn how to be human, then honestly, I appreciate that very much. Darius, Naomi, Alia, Bellwether County, All those names are fictional, not real on the map of America. But the thing lying behind the story, the feeling of a small family being squeezed gradually, bit by bit, by a machine much larger than themselves, is real, and has happened not a few times in real life. If you are curious, you can find to read about the case of Kilo versus the City of New London, a real lawsuit that once went up to the Supreme Court of the United States in 2005, revolving exactly around the question that Naomi had to face in this story. Does a government, a corporation, have the right to take away the house of a normal citizen in the name of development or not? In America currently, there are still organizations like the Institute for Justice, specializing in taking on free legal representation for small families standing before the risk of losing land because of large projects. If you or someone you know have ever fallen into a similar situation, know that you are not lonely at all and have a place to seek to. But there is a thing you do not need to wait to encounter a big matter to be able to do. Next time, when you only hear half of the story about someone, try stopping for 1 second, asking one more question, instead of slamming shut the door immediately, like Darius had done throughout 22 years. Honestly, the paragraph I wrote the slowest in all 10 parts was the paragraph where Darius sat in the small room, opening the tin box, reading every single letter of a woman who had waited throughout so many years to have someone willing to ask her one question. Not because that plot detail was too complicated to write, but because I suddenly thought, surely out there are also very many people keeping a box exactly like that, an explanation having never had the chance to be spoken out only because no one was patient enough to ask. Hope you are always courageous enough to ask one more question before hastily closing a door. And hope that someday, if you yourself are ever misunderstood, there will also be someone patient enough to return, asking you exactly that question. If this story touches you even just a little bit, leave a like, click follow the channel, and send it to a friend you think of while listening. I will return with a new story. See you again in the next video.